So, my friend Gabby.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. I want to thank all of you for coming. How am I doing on the sound? You know, I'm from speech and hearing, and so I can't stand it if there's ever an event where people can't hear very well. Julie said I'm from Communication Sciences and Disorders at WSU, but this doesn't have anything to do with what I did in my professional life. It's something that I've been interested in, and I'll tell you a bit about that as we go along. And since I was a little kid, and probably some of you as well. But then I'm not here as an official master gardener. I'm not wearing the purple uniform shirt from K-State, which I've learned to live with okay. But today, I'm here representing monarchs. And the monarch migration in particular. And people have asked me, where are the monarchs? Well, that's what I want to share a little bit about today. So, the monarch butterfly is the most recognized insect. And that doesn't come as any surprise to you. When I turn, does that cut me off a little bit? Okay. It's the most easily named. Most people, or lots of people, know that it's from the order Lepidoptera, which is butterflies and moths. The scientific name is Danaus plexippus. Maybe you knew that, or maybe you didn't. But most of us know about the stages of the monarch development. Whoopsie, blessing. Am I okay? Should I just keep going? Okay. All right. We know about from an egg to a caterpillar, to a pupa, to an adult butterfly. And I want to expand on that knowledge a little bit today because some of it's very critical to where the monarchs are. We also know now that monarchs migrate. I'm going to shut this door. We didn't used to know that. When I was a little kid, we didn't know that. And I'll talk about that in just a second. We know that they migrate in the fall when the temperatures get colder. Heck, most of us would like to migrate, wouldn't we? When the temperatures get colder. I'm hoping that you can see this poster. It comes from Monarch Watch, which is a group here in Kansas, at the University of Kansas, actually, that has become probably the foremost experts in monarch migration. So here's a map. They think monarchs are a New World butterfly. There are some in other parts of the world, but they were probably carried on boats. They didn't originate here. And we have 3 groups here in the United States. One of them over here in California, and in the wintertime they migrate to the coast of California. You may have heard of some of them around Carmel, I think. They're also in really serious trouble because you know what's happening in California. If you're not having a fire, you're having a flood. So where do butterflies live? Where they're having the fires and the floods. There's also a smaller group in Florida, and you can see the blue indicates where they go for the winter. So those in Florida just go a little bit south to the Keys and, you know, where lots of us like to go for the winter. Those east of the Rockies and up into the southern parts of the Canadian provinces migrate to Mexico, to an area. This little dot here that's yellow is Mexico City. And the blue splash are where the monarch sanctuaries are, in the counties around Mexico City. So I'll refer to that from time to time so you have an idea about the migration. That's probably one of the things that I learned that was the most unique for me. I didn't really know much at all about that. So where do they go when it gets cold? Well, Fred Urquhart, who is from Toronto, Canada, questioned that when he was a young guy, and when he became a doctor at the University of Toronto, I think he's an entomologist, or was, in 1937, he got pretty serious about this. And me too, not in 1937. I wasn't born yet, not quite yet. And I grew up in northern Illinois, about a mile from Wisconsin. And I remember as a young girl, I would see lots of monarchs flitting around our backyard. We had a lot of flowers. And I thought that that was just a natural thing. Well, I came down here to Wichita State in 1969, and I didn't think too much about it, but I really didn't see so many monarchs in the summer. And then Dale and I were going over to the Hillsboro Fair, if any of you have ever been to that. We were going on K-15 from North Newton over to Hillsboro, and all of a sudden we had to stop the car. There were so many monarchs in the road. Couldn't believe it. They were everywhere, and we were scared to death that we were going to smash into some of them. What we didn't know, this was like about 1973, 4 or so. We didn't know that we were in the middle of a monarch migration. Well, Fred, already a professional, I call him Fred like I know him. I've seen a movie about him, so I feel like I do. He began a tagging research. And he advertised in 1952, you see it took him a while to get there, for citizen scientists to be on the lookout for where there were monarchs and to report that to him. And he started working on some tags. And I think the first ones he had were about the size of a postage stamp. I mean, poor monarch couldn't go anywhere with the size of those. So he kept working on that. In 1972, 20 years later, his wife advertised in papers in Mexico. Well, by that time, they'd kind of figured out that they went south someplace, but they didn't know where. So about 1975, Ken Brugger and his wife, Catalina Aguado, would take the weekends on his motorcycle and look for them in the mountains. He was an engineer in Mexico City. And they would go out into the mountains and look to see if they could find any signs of monarchs in that area, and they did. So 38 years after Fred Urquhart was first starting to look for them, they discovered the overwintering site in the Sierra Madres outside of Mexico City. This was reported in 1976 in National Geographic magazine. I'd love to get my hands on that article. And then just last year, Dale and I went to the Cosmosphere over in Hutchinson and saw this movie, Flight of the Butterflies, a documentary about that. And I kind of think Anderson Cooper referred to that too when he did a report last year for 60 Minutes. So lots of people are interested in that. I want to talk about it a little bit more. Speaking of citizen scientists, Louise Hicks is somebody that I met from Overland Park, Kansas. And she and her husband, through Monarch Watch, started tagging butterflies. And this is a tag that she set in Overland Park, actually Olathe, on September 23rd, 2021. It was discovered at El Rosario Sanctuary down here on February 8th, 2022. So there's the proof that the monarchs actually migrate, and somebody actually tagged it. She told me that they receive $5 if they find a tag down at El Rosario. So people are on the lookout, the people that are the caretakers of that sanctuary. Well, it wasn't until 1986, remember this was 1975 when they discovered it, so 10 years plus later, they established a monarch butterfly biosphere reserve to take care of the space where the monarchs were spending the winter. It was 139,000 acres, 65 miles northwest of Mexico City, in the mountains, protected the overwintering site, and it was the subalpine Oyamel fir forest where they found them. Now, I don't know if any of you ever get a noble fir or a Fraser fir for a Christmas tree, but the needles on that fir are unique, and I'll talk about that in just a second. There are four and it is monitored by World Wildlife of Mexico. 4 reserves are open to the public, 2 of them in the state of Mexico, and 2 of them in the state of Michoacan, which is a little bit west of there. Another smaller one is at Sierra Chinqua. And I'm saying that because we visited there. I'll get to that in a second. Some of you maybe are familiar with this book by Sarah Dykman. She's a field biologist originally from, I believe, either Lenexa or Overland Park here in Kansas, but she was living in, studying toads in, I think in California. Sounds logical, doesn't it? Anyway, she was interested. She spent some time in El Rosario, living with some people who were in that area, and decided that she would ride her bicycle. I've got a picture of her bicycle in this book. It was loaded down because she went by herself and camped by herself all along this journey. I'm going to give it to Lou. There are a couple places that are clipped and you can pass it around. I loved reading this book, but I loved especially hearing Sarah Dykman talk. Sharon Anderson, who was a friend of mine who's here today, and I went to Valley Center to the library to hear her talk in 2022. She rode her bike from El Rosario Sanctuary following the migration. Now, the monarchs weren't real good as far as Google and things like that, Google Maps to help her know where she's to go. So plenty of time she was riding along, and for most of the day she would see no monarch, but then she would, and know she was on the right track. So if you've read that book, you know it's fascinating. She does a great job of not only chronicling her journey, but she spent a lot of time speaking to groups as she went along. That kind of allowed her financially to keep going because she didn't have a big pot of money to do this. She rode from March the 12th to November 30th. So from the spring migration all summer long into the fall till November 30th of 2017. She rode 10,201 miles in 255 days. It was a fascinating story. And along the way, she talked about what she saw. Well, after I had heard her talk, I thought in the back of my head, boy, I'd really like to see that someday. And one of the master gardeners is actually gone. And she told me, I said, how was that trip? She said, I wouldn't recommend it. She said, it was really hard. You have to go way up high on a very narrow, dusty path. And at the time she was there, it was hailing. And she said, it was awful. I didn't think I would make it. But that didn't deter me one bit because we have some friends who are very avid travelers, and we've traveled a lot with them since we've retired. And they said, have you ever thought about going to Mexico to see the butterfly sanctuaries? And I said, yes, I have, as a matter of fact. And so we went February 6th through the 9th in 2024. We stayed in Morelia. We flew down through Dallas to Morelia. It's a city about the size of Wichita. We took a bus, 3-hour kind of van trip up into the mountains. We were the only 4 Americans. There were maybe 6 or so Canadians who were also very interested in the monarch migration. And then everybody else was from the area. Our guide was bilingual, sort of. Have you ever been someplace where they're talking in their native language and it goes on and on and on and on, and then they speak in English and say about 2 sentences? That's kind of how this was. So I think we missed a few things, but anyway, we paid when we got there I'll show you a picture of El Rosario in just a second. 170 pesos, which I think is maybe like about $5. I don't know, maybe not even that much, to ride a horse through the part that we thought was the steepest. It wasn't. We got off the horse and then we walked almost straight up to 10,000 feet in this really narrow path. We had to stop a lot of times to catch our breath and anything else that we thought left behind. It was a tough go. It took Sarah about an hour to do this. She just explains in her book, and it took us much longer. It was a sunny February day, and this is important, about 55 degrees. 55 degrees is the lower flight threshold for monarchs. Below that, they can't fly. At 45, they can crawl, but at 55, they can fly. So this was a warmish day. Some of them were waking up, and as they woke up, they were looking for water, and they would find this in little pans and puddles around. And they were also looking for nectar because they had been quite a while since they had really eaten anything. But then there were thousands of them that were hung really tightly with their wings folded in to the oyamel fir trees on the branches. The oyamel has a flat needle, and so and a center like reservoir or something, so that they could, with their little feet, hold on and be really close together to keep warm. And the weather was cool, so they were essentially like hibernating during that time. Sarah said this, that they were orange gems strung on a volcanic necklace. And I thought that was a beautiful way to put that. And it was breathtaking and magical, and like being in a monarch snow globe is what it was like. It was just fantastic. This is the outside of El Rosario Mariposa Monarca Sanctuary. And this was the outside of Sierra Cinque. There were fewer people there. We did this 2 days after the first hike in El Rosario. And we started a little higher, and the trajectory was not so steep. It was more doable, and we weren't as breathless. I won't say we weren't breathless, but we weren't as breathless as we did that one. The guide, however, was very concerned because he said there are fewer monarchs, and we have known that they have been, that's me, and that's how close we could be to those trees, but they went on further and further. I don't know if you can see this very well at all, but this is the monarch population status. They've been tracking it since about 1994, and that's what you have over here. And then you can see in 97 was the highest population, and then it went downhill and back up and down and back up and down and back up. The lowest was in 2014, and there were 0.67 monarchs per hectare. That's how they measured them. When we were there in 2024, it wasn't quite that bad, but pretty bad. We heard on the way home a report from NPR that this was a really critical year, and the population had dwindled quite a bit from the year before, which was a disappointment because they thought they were kind of on the rise a little bit. Now this was last year in 2025, and you can see that the population increased. In fact, it says up here, there was a 99% increase from the previous year. So keep that in mind as we go along. This was put out by Monarch Watch, again, the group at the University of Kansas. Monarchs have 2 phases, and I know you know lots of this, so I'm going to kind of speed through it a little bit. The reproductive phase begins about mid-March. They're down in Mexico. About mid-March, it starts to warm up. the air temperature, about 55 degrees. So they're leaving Mexico. As they leave Mexico, they're going to be mating with the idea that they will lay the first generation eggs in the southern part of Texas on milkweed, if there are milkweed ready. Here's an egg. You can see that little tiny dot. The first generation is a single egg on the backside of a milkweed leaf near the top. The eggs are only laid on milkweed because that's the only thing that the caterpillar eats. Milkweed, the only thing the caterpillar eats. The female, after ovipositing or laying her eggs, dies, and the male dies very soon after fertilization so that he's not in competition for the nectar that the first generation will need. The egg hatches in about 4 days. So if you see monarchs flying around your milkweed, check in about 4 days to see if you've got any activity on the milkweed. Here's the caterpillar stage, or the larva stage. This is the period where they grow the most. They start out as that teeny egg, and then they grow, they molt 5 times. You can see that they're this gold, black, and white striped caterpillar. At the end of the 5th instar, or the 5th molting, they travel sometimes about 30 feet away in order to create their chrysalis in a safe place. Here's the chrysalis of the first generation. The gold dots see around the top of the pupa reminded early American colonists of a crown. So that's where they got the name monarch. Moth spins a cocoon, but a butterfly creates a chrysalis. This takes about 2 weeks to transform completely, and I could say a whole bunch about what happens inside the pupa, but I know that you all have other places to be today. So it takes about 2 weeks before they eclose, in other words, come out of the pupa. The first generation is a pretty much solitary insects that you'll see flying in your garden, looking to lay eggs. The females are looking to lay eggs, but if you see 2, you're seeing a male and female looking to mate. The males have these small black pouches that are androconia on the scales. That's how you can tell a male from a female. And supposedly they're for pheromones used in courting, kind of a scent that attracts the female. They are nectivores now, so they're looking for flowers that have nectar. And pollination occurs accidentally. As they're looking for nectar, the pollen rubs off on their bodies onto the next flower and the next flower, and so that's how they're able to pollinate. They don't have any kind of a mouth because they're nectivores. They have a proboscis, so they sip the nectar. This is a picture, not a lovely picture, from our driveway. A hint for attracting. They have an immobile compound eye, so they're not really looking around. They are attracted to a color array rather than individual blossoms. So when you plant flowers of the same species and color together, that helps them conserve energy and be able to find the nectar that they need. So it's a visual spectacle and a fragrance that attracts the butterflies. Interestingly, the olfactory sense, the smell, is on their antenna, and the taste is on their feet. And they walk on the back 2 legs, and the front leg is kind of out there to sniff out the good nectar. All right, here's a problem with the first generation. They might arrive too early for the milkweed to be ready in southern Texas, and that has happened. There's not enough milkweed available because of weather in southern Texas. It didn't warm up fast enough, and loss of habitat caused by urban sprawl, cities growing and growing, Texas, and the use of pesticides. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Also parasites. If they arrive early, they can get there ahead of the predators and then be on their way. But if they arrive a little later, the predators are there to eat the eggs. They do contain that cardiac glycosides, a toxin that's bitter. Have you ever tasted the milk of a milkweed? It tastes horrible. I think everybody maybe does that once. The same with insects that are predators. They don't like that. So when they see that color, that gold and black, they steer clear of the caterpillar and the adult butterfly. The reproductive phase for the second generation. So here's the first generation down here in southern Texas. The second generation can be up here in Kansas or farther north. So there's the second generation. That's in April to May. They're continuing to travel north, and the females lay eggs along the way. It takes about 5 days after they have come out or eclosed in order to be ready to lay eggs. They need nectar at that time and milkweed because they're going to lay their eggs on milkweed for the caterpillars, but they need the nectar for the energy. The females, interestingly, can mate 8 times or more. No, up to 8 times, I think it is. With different males before they oviposit. This, according to scientists, is for genetic variability possibly, and to make stronger eggs. The third generation, and those will be the ones that are the continuing north up in here in southern Canada, the New England states. All of this is part of the eastern migration. Those eggs hatch in the northernmost states, and they can continue until it's too cold for milkweed to grow. So that makes sense. That limits their habitat there. Some problems for the second and third generations, that's these. Again, weather. Sometimes if it's rainy or cold, the females can't lay eggs. And so that's delayed and maybe even causes them to miss out on a generation. Pesticides in fields, particularly in this area right here that's called the Corn Belt, have caused a loss of habitat for milkweed. Also, and nectar. You don't see as many wildflowers either as you used to as you drive along. And then other agricultural practices, and there's a lot I could say about this. But you'll notice now that they plant fields right up to the road. So the ditches and things that used to contain milkweed don't necessarily anymore. All right, the migration phase comes next. Well, a lot of butterflies overwinter in place, like the swallowtail. They overwinter as chrysalis, and they look like something you'd throw in the trash. And they often are on leaves. And so Xerces Society said, leave the leaves. Those are the habitat for the next generation of swallowtails. Monarchs, however, are ectothermic. They're cold-blooded. And they move south because of the cool weather. Sometimes as many as 3,000 miles, like from way up here. This generation, heading south, has never been to Mexico. They don't know where to go. So how in the world do they find this place down here? In Mexico, they're referred to as the Generación Methuselah, the oldest person in the Bible. And Mexican legends also equate this re-entrance of the monarchs to Day of the Dead, the return of the spirits. So those that were hatched in the north are going to be, and I'll tell you about this for just a few minutes, are both genetically, biologically, and behaviorally different. And that's why people are continuing to study monarchs, even though we know a lot about them. There have been some really interesting things. Genetically, there's a gene, collagen 4 alpha, that allows for significantly different muscle functioning of the monarchs that are going to be migrating to the south. So they're beefier. This is different than the reproductive monarchs that are coming up from here. And they are able to utilize energy more efficiently. Biologically, they're different in that their bodies store more fat in their abdomens. Now, we can't see that because we can't really tell the difference between a fat monarch and a skinny one. But during the late summer, that's to fuel their flight south and their extended the hibernation that they'll be having, because they're not going to be eating very much during that time. This is also very interesting, and I put this in bold. I didn't know it. They go through a reproductive diapause, which means that they're not sexually active during the time they're coming from here all the way down to Mexico through the winter. Not until the summer, the spring, where remember I told you they're starting to head back to Texas. So they don't mate until the next spring. Reproductive monarchs live 2 to 6 weeks, but the migrating monarchs can live 6 to 9 months. Wow, it's amazing. And behaviorally, they're different. They travel for longer distances as they're migrating, and there's some thoughts about that. The sun is their compass because they fly during the day, not at night. In fact, some people have seen them. They also travel in groups when they're heading to the south, and somebody in the back has seen them gathered in groups to spend the night or 2 or 3 nights. That's something that I'm hoping to learn a little bit more about. The angle of the sun along the horizon, their internal body clocks, kind of like circadian rhythm, helps them to move in that southwesterly direction. And in 2014, they discovered what they called a magnetic compass theory, and that is that there's shortwave UV light that guides them through their antenna to keep funneling to the southwest. Well, some of the problems in the migration we already kind of know about. Kansas is one of the 10 states that's really critical for the monarch migration south. When they stop in Kansas, like right now, in the month of September, they need nectar. They don't need the milkweed so much. Usually by about the first week of September, they have stopped mating. So they don't need the milkweed so much as they travel south. But it's really important that they have the nectar. Our fall weather in Kansas, as you know, is different. It's hotter later. So their flight threshold is 55 degrees to 88. Heck, I think it was a lot hotter than 88 a few days last week. So that is kind of making things sort of messy. Okay. You may have heard that there's some controversy about whether or not they should be considered endangered. Right now they're threatened. This is the hierarchy for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Warranted, not warranted, warranted but not precluded, which we had been, threatened, which we are currently with monarchs, and some want to move to the endangered status. U.S. Fish and Wildlife proposed last December, after a long discussion, that monarchs move from threatened to endangered. I had read something on the back, but I might not do that. We'll see if I have time after we get finished. Chip Taylor from Monarch Watch at the University of Kansas says this: tags will tell the story. They'll fill in the gaps about the future of monarch migration. He is cautiously optimistic about monarch survival because they have a high reproductive rate, higher than lots of other animals, insects even. Their ability to recover from conditions that has caused a sharp decline is impressive. And their wide range of mobility and migration. So if there's not milkweed here, they can go here. He also wrote, which I thought was kind of discouraging, we might be able to save the species, but we might not save the migration. I'm hoping that's not true. I'm showing you this slide again to show you that we increased a bit last year. And so they're hopeful about that. So what is and can still be done? Everything that we do in our gardens is really important. It makes a difference. Last year, I sent in my information to become a Monarch way station in my yard. It wasn't that hard to do. I think I had to have 3 different species of flowers in the spring, 3 in the summer, and 3 different ones in the fall, and at least 3 different kinds of milkweed. A place for a little bit of water in my yard, and that doesn't have to be anything. And then a place for shelter, and became a Monarch way station. I'm showing this to my neighbor because he sprays, and I don't want him to spray anymore. So, but I've kind of invested in him a little bit. The applications for that are online. Now this is my perspective, my next to the last slide, from the profession that I've been in, sifting and sequencing data my whole professional life. We can all develop more tolerance for insects. Every insect does not need to be sprayed. Let me repeat. Every insect does not need to be sprayed. Buy milkweed from places that sell native plants. And on a little handout that I've got for you, if you want to take one, it lists a couple places where they have native plants. One of them is over by Cheney, and she has a booth at the market on West Wichita on Saturdays and sells, in fact, I bought some antelope, what? Thank you. Antelope horn milkweed from her on Saturday, because I haven't been able to get that to grow in my yard. And native plants are important because they're already adapted to where we live, to our climate. Ornamentals are particularly hybridized so that they have showier flowers and less nectar. So that's important to think about. We need to try to plant milkweed in any green space we've got. In fact, I'm thinking out in here, I might put some of my milkweed seeds and see if we could get anything growing along that little creek. This is really important, that we water fall flowers, because they are the important nectar sources for monarchs heading to Mexico. And a lot of times by this time we're tired and we don't want to do so much in our garden. So it's important to water those. Asters, sedum, stonecrop, I think that might be a kind of sedum. This is a really important one, and that is ragweed is a weed, but what's the one that I have in my yard? What? Goldenrod. Goldenrod is really important, and it's easy to grow, and it's perennial. You put it in the ground and it has the beautiful gold fountains, and that's really important. So keep doing anything that you can in your life for climate change, because we need to take delight in every monarch we see. They're the indicators of the health of our ecosystem, the ecosystem that we're enjoying right now and leaving for the next generations. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you would like to ask. Thank you. Not sure how to stop this. Oh. I don't know. Okay. Do you have questions that you want to ask or comments? Yes, Sharon. Oh, yeah.
This is always confusing. It's September now. I've seen monarchs in the yard. Am I seeing the ones that are going north? Or am I
They're going south. They're going south.
Where were they in Kansas when they were going north? Where were they?
They could have been. They're in Kansas in April and May, and sometimes a little bit in June, and they're going north. These are all headed south because they're not going to overwinter here. I didn't believe that they made it as they headed south. But I've read recently that up until the first week of September they mate. So the ones that are near yard mating, yeah. When they're two, they're mating. They're not enjoying a lunch together. But yeah.
What nectar flower?
Well, in the spring I leave the dandelions a little while because there's not much blooming. Milkweed has a lovely blossom that they use for nectar. Well, those are the fall. Yeah, in the spring, boy, I'm blanking on it. Practically anything you have. I'm trying to think, it's fall now. Yes, and butterfly bush, that's another one that grows in the summer and maybe starts in the spring. It's harder for us in the spring because we don't have typically as many. And I was also going to tell you that my common milkweed, after it blooms, I cut it off and it'll bloom again in the fall. So that's a good thing.
What about these ornamental plum trees?
There are, I don't know so much about that. I don't know. You know what I do? I go to places like Botanica, and I go to places like the Extension out at Ridge and 21st Street, and they've got a pollinator garden, and look at what they're on. And we're interested in all the pollinators, bees and other insects that pollinate, not just butterflies. I can do a little bit more research on that if you want me to, and I can tell you
There's
some.
a lot of concord grapes. Are those possibly food for the farmhouse?
I don't know about the fruit. I don't know. Does anybody know? I don't know. I don't know
I've not
that.
seen any monarchs hovering around my.
Yeah. Bees, though, I bet.
Yeah,
They
bees
probably
and
like
wasps.
What else? Yes.
About zinnias and marigolds.
Yes. Zinnias especially. Yes, they love zinnias. Sharon has lots of zinnias in her yard and lots of monarchs on them.
Flowers that are shaped, the blossoms are shaped, open and flat, like zinnias, are really attractive to lots of butterflies because it's like a patio they can stand on.
Oh. Yeah, that's really good.
And that's where you stand.
Some marigolds, but some marigolds have been pretty hybridized. So you want to kind of read the package of the seeds or read about the plants. Get what?
Ladybugs?
Oh yeah, ladybugs. Well, they love them. Yeah. Thank you all so much.
I heard an ominous statement. If we don't have insects, we're not going to have birds.
We're not going to have food.
And we won't have birds.
That's right.
And we won't have food.
And we need to be working on that food that you can grow on Mars and things like that, which doesn't taste as good.
And the bees are hard. Without bees, we won't have food.
Yes. So sell the spray or give it to the, what is that place where you take your hazardous waste? Yeah.
And bug zappers.
I don't know about those. I don't know, but I like bugs, and so it's different. Yeah.
So the temperature is what cues the.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And the directionality, you're saying that you're guided by
By this
ultraviolet?
and the sun, yeah. There's really interesting research being done in recent years about that. So that's fun to know about. Yeah, this is such a unique thing, you don't want it to go away. So
The elevation, I'm very intrigued on how high up you had to go for this selection of monarchs. It's high.
it's very high, 10,000 feet and a little bit more, 10,000, 12,000 down there. But it's also interesting that there is kind of volcanic, and so when you're driving along, you see sort of clouds. Well, that moisture has also helped to keep the temperature at a nice level so that they can make it through the winter. If they have like ice storms and they do sometimes, that can interrupt that and cause them to die, and they do. And then you also heard about logging down there. They're really, really, really encouraging people to do other things with tourism and that kind of stuff. The only people working at the sanctuaries are people from the area. They're not bringing a bunch of American kids down there to do that. These are the people who live there all the time and have been around the Monarchs their whole lives.
What was the year of that highest on your chart? The really high?
2013, I think. Yeah, 2014.
We don't know what went on that.
A lot of it was weather, and they have discovered that. In fact, Dr. Taylor has studied kind of what the highs and lows are, and he can attribute a lot of that to weather in particular. That's why he's less concerned with making them endangered, because once you have all the stipulations on endangered, you can't get rid of them. And a lot of people who are engaged in agriculture are fighting that. One other thing that's very cool is that the state of Texas has mandated that they don't mow until after the monarchs are through. And they're leaving a lot of center lane on the interstate. Our interstate I-35 is really important, and they're leaving a lot of that to grow naturally so that the native plants can come back. So that's cool. Kansas, no, but wait and see. So anyway, somebody's waiting out there. I guess I need to be done, huh?
Thank you very much. This is really
Well, this was really fun for me, so I appreciate you coming. I appreciate your applause. All right. Oh, if anybody wants, I've got I made 10 of these. But if you'd like to take a picture of it or you would like to have one, you can. This is sort of a summary of the migration. Includes like how many days the lifespan of a egg to adult, some references, the reference for Monarch Watch, for Journey North, and some of the others, and then some ideas about native plants. So if you want to take some of these, you can. If you want me to send this to you, my email, I still have my email, kathy.strattman@wichita.edu, so I can still get that. And I'd be happy to send this to you or any other information that you'd like to have. So, very good. Thank you, Julie, for reminding me about that.